Discover PowerShell. Today we're going to talk about running commands. We're going to just run some commands, the anatomy of a command, commands and their naming conventions, shortcuts to use, running external commands, and dealing with errors. We'll bring up the ISE, and we'll start off with the first command called get WMI Object. Give it a class of Win32 logical disk. I want to know that for this current computer, and I want to filter out the drive, the root drive basically, and there we have it. So let's tear down this command. Get WMI Object. Get is the verb, WMI Object is a noun. For any PowerShell command, it's a verb-noun syntax. If someone says, hey, run the command get WMI Object, it's implied that the dash is there. There will be certain cases where you'll think that this isn't really a noun. So, for example, there are some commands like new alias. New isn't really a verb. You probably say like create alias. That would have made a little bit more sense, but that's not for us to decide. Class. This is a parameter which requires the dash in front of it, and Win32 logical disk is the argument, with which may or may not have single or double quotes. Once again, we have dash computer name and its argument localhost, and dash filter with this argument drive type equals 3. Now, if the argument has a space in it, then the double quotes would be required. But since there is no space in these two arguments, then it's not required. Let's try that again. Now, as you can see in the ISE, it provides us with a little bit of color coding, so we can see that Win32 logical disk is the argument, and this argument is shaded a little bit differently because it's in quotes. If I were to remove those, it still works. And then once the command runs, then the color coding disappears. Another thing to remember is that the noun is always singular. So for some of the commands we saw last time, like get process, well, it's a singular noun, and it really implies that you get one-to-many processes, but the singular version is probably a little bit easier to read, a little bit easier to type. There's fewer characters, and so we'll just stick with that. And let's try get verb. This is going to provide us all the approved verbs in PowerShell. So, for example, we saw get. We've seen see, there's update help. Yeah, here we go. Update help. And so, in the future, if you're creating your own commands, then you would want to pick the verbs from this list. Otherwise, PowerShell would give you some kind of warning message saying that it was not an approved verb. And we'll try another command called get command, and we'll use a wildcard for computer. Okay, this commandlet's really cool because it returns all the commands that match whatever criteria, and it tells you what kind of command type it is. So just from this list, we can see that there's an add computer, and it's a commandlet, but we also see computer defaults, which is an application. So PowerShell is great because it has some built-in commands, and it supports running external applications. So if you wanted to run like Notepad, boom, there you go. So you can make PowerShell a replacement for the command exe. Uh, Another interesting thing is that they've used this name called commandlet, the CMDLET, pronounced commandlet. Uh, this is something new to Windows PowerShell. So if you do a Google search for a particular command, if you toss in commandlet, then it would optimize the search results for PowerShell. Uh, Commandlets are built-in commands that you can run. So when PowerShell deployed whatever file is necessary to run, these are built in. You can't go change the code on these. Now there are ways that you can override the behavior, but you can't alter these. You'll see some that say function, and let's try that so we can get a larger list. So we've got commandlets, we've got functions, we've got a filter. So the functions are sort of the next level after commandlet, and these can be like custom functions that you've written in a script. They tend to override certain behaviors if you use let's say I wrote a function called add bits file, it would override the behavior of this commandlet. And let's run get command on a known command. Okay, so get process. We could do get command on commandlet workflow, which is new to PowerShell version 3 and function. And it looks like it can't recognize commandlet. So how will we solve that? Well, if I read the help, which in this case is a little bit difficult to read, so I'm going to go ahead and make an adjustment so it's easier to read. I went to tools and options, and now we're just waiting for it to load up. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and change the output stream for error. The error background has a default color of transparent, so I want to make it red, and I want to make the foreground white, so I'll make it a little bit easier to read. So if I ran that again, okay, well, it doesn't know the commandlet or workflow or function. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, get command is looking for a name. So really what I should have done was command type, and then it would return all that. Alright, and we'll look up another command called get alias. Okay, this is a way to basically have a shortcut for commands. As we saw earlier when we called get WMI Object, it was just a lot to type. So if we look in this list for get WMI Object, right here, GWMI. Now I could have done something different to bring it up. I bring up the name, let's see, the definition. You could get WMI Object, then it shows that GWMI is the alias. And what I was going to make a mistake and do is the name would be GWMI, and then that would basically do the reverse and tell you what the command name is. So if we go back and run our original command, there we go. I can change this to GWMI, and that still works. And I'll go ahead and shorten these a little bit. Okay, and that still works. Okay, so why does that work? Well, in PowerShell, um, it only needs enough to make it unique, enough information. So it looks like if I do class, I could have just done a C, and if I do computer name, well, okay, so I couldn't have done just a C for class because it would have matched with computer name. So I would have had to do CL, which I did, and then for computer I could do CO, and then for filter I could just do F. So let's see how short we can get that. And it still works. So you can also see that it's case insensitive. So uppercase, lowercase, it doesn't matter. What's important is spacing. So it's important to see that there's a space between the GWMI and the -CL. See, that would error out. It says it doesn't know the term GWMICL. So you want to be sure to watch your spacing. If for some reason, say you had a computer name that was like local space host, you'd have to put it in quotes in order for that to work. Of course, this doesn't exist, so it would just error out. Okay, and you can also run more familiar commands such as dir and ls, and well, we've seen the cls, which will clear the screen. Any of these commands such as dir, these are really aliases. So if I get alias, it tells you that it's a alias for get child item. So if I run dir, it doesn't change the behavior of the command get child item. It's just an alias for something that you already know. So you couldn't do, some weird commands, weird arguments rather. You would still use PowerShell arguments and switches. Okay. And another command that's useful is called show command, which will basically show the window that we had here earlier. This is nice because it gives you a little cheater for running whatever commands. So if you're not quite sure and you want to bring up a little GUI for it, do show command, get process for example, and then it'll pop up the GUI, and then I can type whatever I want, and then I can copy, paste it, and there you have it. We could run some other commands such as ping. So this would be the native Windows command, and you would still use whatever parameters that they have provided. So like in this case, see, it doesn't show any IntelliSense because ping isn't an alias for any of the PowerShell commands. One interesting thing though, let's say if I run ping localhost, this is how it prints it out. And that is alright, but the PowerShell built-in command is actually a little bit better. So if I run it on localhost, it prints it out into a table, which is a little bit easier to read, and it even has a nice feature of doing a count. Say I only want it to happen once. So here you saved like 4 seconds. So that's pretty neat. And just to recap, we've talked about running commands. So like just get process, for example. That's just running a basic command. We've talked about the structure of the command, which is verb-noun syntax. So anytime you run a PowerShell command, unless you're using an alias, it's verb-noun. And then be mindful of all the spacing in the command. You can set up your own alias. We saw earlier dir was an alias for get child item. I could do a new alias d, and the value be dir. So if I run D, it's an alias for dir. So I can get alias for D, get child item. If I did get alias for definition, get child item. Learning to type. Here it shows that there's 3 aliases, dir, gci, ls. These are the built-in aliases. It didn't show mine. Making up commands now. I don't know what I'm doing. I have to figure out how to display that one. I imagine if I ran get alias, probably show it in here somewhere. Yeah. Okay. I don't know what I need to do to get alias to show it, but if I just run get alias, it shows it in the list. So there's some other thing they got to figure out, and I'm sure you can figure that out, and you can send me an email about it. That's all for today. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, and we'll see you next time.